Our scripture today comes from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 16, verses 19 through 31. Here begins the reading. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen, who feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who longed to satisfy his hunger with what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs would come and lick his sores. The poor man died and was carried away by the angels to be with Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was being tormented, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. He called out, "Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in agony in these flames." But Abraham said, "Child, remember that during your lifetime you received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner evil things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. Besides all this, between you and us a great chasm has been fixed, so that those who might want to pass from here to you cannot do so, and no one can cross from there to us." He said, "Then, Father, I beg you to send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may warn them, so that they will not also come into this place of torment." Abraham replied, "They have Moses and the prophets. They should listen to them." He said, "No, Father Abraham, but if someone comes to them from the dead, they will repent." He said to them, "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Will you pray with me? O Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be forever acceptable in thy sight. O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. And at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who longed to satisfy his hunger with what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs would come and lick his sores. When I was in seminary, I was working as a youth minister at Midway Christian Church in Azle, Texas, just outside of Fort Worth. And I was in the office one day by myself, and the phone rang. And it was, by happenstance, the Parker County Sheriff. And I saw that on the caller ID, and I thought to myself, I probably should answer this. Something's probably going on. And so I did, and the deputy that was on the phone said, "Is pastor available?" And I said, "Well, I'm the youth pastor. So what can I help you with?" And he said, "Well, there's this woman that we were called in to come see. Someone was afraid that she might commit suicide. And so we went on a suicide watch and went to go to her and see what the problem was. And she was ranting and raving and asked if she could talk to a Christian minister." So we looked up in the phone book and saw Midway Christian Church. So we thought we'd call and see if there was a pastor that could come and talk to them. And I said, "Oh, well, I'm the youth pastor. The senior minister's not in right now." And he said, "Okay." And then so I said, wait, I can come out. And I did. And so after giving me the address, I went to what happened to be the public housing, public apartments of Azle, the ones for people who are in low income. And there was this older woman there. I don't really know how old she was. She was retired, but she was older than that. She had been ranting and raving, like the sheriff said. When I got there, she still was. And so when I went in and tried to talk with her or listen to her, she would go on and on and on. And then as I pieced bits and parts of her story together, what she was saying, I came to realize before she retired as her career, she was a nurse. She was a nurse in the NICU. And so it was her job to work with families and with babies that were sick or ones that were premature. And she was having some sort of crisis where she was coming to grips with the fact that some of the children that she worked with, died. And she took the blame on her, that it was her fault. It was her fault those babies died. And she was wanting forgiveness. She needed and felt that no one could forgive her. So she wanted to talk to a minister and ask if God would forgive her for letting those babies die or not being able to save them. And so I said, of course. I said, it's not your fault. But even if, it's there. Jesus forgives us, reconciles the world. And she still wouldn't listen to me. She still would rant and rant. And so I turned to the sheriff and asked, do you know this woman's name? She didn't say her name. I introduced myself, but she kept on talking. And he said no. And so I turned and asked, ma'am, what's your name? What's your name? And finally I broke through and she told me, my name's Mary. And so I said, Mary, you are forgiven. This wasn't your fault. And even if it was, Jesus forgives you. And as soon as I said her name, she stopped. And so we prayed together. And then I left. And I had other things to do. And I don't know what happened to Mary. And at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who longed to satisfy his hunger with what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs would come and lick his sores. I've been preaching here about a year now. We didn't make the relationship Facebook official until the first weekend in November, but I started last September. But I took a Sunday or two off in the middle at the beginning of October because that's when my grandmother died. She died on October 5th, so this week. And as I've been thinking about that, I was reflecting on the time when, before I started here and moved to Columbia, I was able to go to Des Moines and back because I wasn't working and be with her as she descended further and further into her brain and cancer. And it was good that I was able to go there and be with her and sit with her. And each time I went, it would be a week or two, and her condition would change. Well, the first time I went, she was pretty much fine, and then she couldn't move, and then she couldn't talk, and then she couldn't get out of bed, and then she died. But the last time I went there and she could talk, we sat together for the entire day. I would leave at about 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, get there around 11, and spend maybe a good 5-6 hours with her before I had to drive back home. And the last time I was there that she could talk, not the last time I was there, but the last time she could talk, we were saying goodbye. It was time for me to go. And so at that point, she couldn't get out of bed. She could still talk, but she was lying down on the couch. That's where she was all the time. She was on the couch. And so she was lying down, and I went in to give her a hug. And as I gave her a hug and told her goodbye, she leaned in and whispered into my ear. And mind you, this was in August, and that's important. This was in August, in the middle to late August. I leaned in and said goodbye, and she didn't say goodbye. She said to me, what's your daughter's name? And so I had to tell her, Grandmommy. That was her name, Grandmommy. Grandmommy, we don't have a daughter. We're trying, but we don't have a daughter. She said, oh, okay. And so I hugged her goodbye and then left and drove home. When Hannah and I found out that she was pregnant, it had been before my grandma died, but when she died, we made the decision that we knew what at least her middle name was going to be if it was a girl. And so our daughter's name is Abigail Ann, because my grandmother's name was Patricia Ann, We couldn't name the daughter Patricia because one of my childhood crushes was named Patricia, Patty Flannery, and so we couldn't have that. But we could name her Abigail Ann. Names are important. And at his gate lay down a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who longed to satisfy his hunger with what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs would lick his sores. I'm going to read to you a bit of a journal that I wrote after I took a group of my congregation in Burlington to Nicaragua. We went to visit some of our global mission partners there, people who are working in the local community, people who are trying to help people get on their feet and try and help them have a better life. And we went and visited with them, and I thought part of what we saw would be good for you to hear. And so there's some names in here that are in Spanish because we're in Nicaragua, so I'm not going to translate them because they're their names. You can ask me what they are later. That's fine. We were going to a little town called El Porvenir for the afternoon. So we packed into the 4x4 trucks and headed back the way we came. Eventually, we took another fork in the road and were led to even more perilous roads. At one point, the only thing between the truck and a drop-off where we couldn't see the bottom was a barbed wire fence with one strip of barbed wire. Oh, and it was still raining, an important theme in the events of the day. At one point, the incline was so steep and the road so muddy, Jairo had all the occupants of the truck get out because he couldn't get up the mountain. The wheels kept on spinning. We must have got stuck next to a home because a family of a mother and several children turned out to see what the commotion was. We got out and watched as Jairo attempted for about 5 minutes to get up the mountain. After struggling, he backed up. He had to go down the mountain to get to a semi-level spot, to get a running start, to make it over the hump. Barely. Once Jairo's truck disappeared around the mountainous bend, we had to hike our way up to see where we were, to see if he would come and pick us up. But much to our surprise, the town we were going to was right there. We got stuck literally at the last turn. But we made our way forward to find a man waiting for us. His name was Pedro. El Porvenir was his home. He walks to and from a garden, a place, Finca Esperanza Verde, a forest, each day for work. It's a dangerous 1-hour trip for us by truck, but it was only an 8-minute walk for him. That's how mountainous and curvy it was. Pedro welcomed us into his village, where about 200 souls live and about 30 families. We were quickly ushered into what we found out was Pedro's home. We met some of his family, nieces and nephews and cousins, and he took us into a room full of tables, plastic tables and plastic chairs, the sort you'd had out for a family reunion. We found the tables were set, for we were about to be served lunch. We dined on scrumptious soup, chock full of maize dumplings and chicken. Basically, we were served the Nicaraguan version of chicken and dumplings. They filled us up and filled our bowls so much that we couldn't finish all that they gave us. And I do have to comment on where we were eating. Pedro's home was a 3-room stone building with dirt floors and a zinc tin, think tin roof. 2 years ago, the community installed electricity, but it wasn't working then, and that happened often. Pedro's home was simple and clean enough, but you would be hard-pressed to call it anything other than a shack. But out of his scarcity, he provided us with abundance. Out of his poorness, he provided us with a rich meal. And at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who longed to satisfy his hunger with what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs would come and lick his sores. Lazarus is the only person in all of Jesus' parables that is named. The only one we know whose name it was. Now, this is important. Names are important. They tell us who is the main character, who is we should look to, who it is that we should turn to when we read. And so we have the rich man who isn't named, and we have Lazarus who is. And that rich man, he thought himself important. So important that even in death, he thought he could tell Lazarus what to do. He thought he could control life even after he died. That he could sort of work his way into God's mercy. It says, have mercy on me. He thought he could tell Lazarus what to do. Give me a drink of water, even a little bit. Go to my family, tell them what's waiting for them. Go to them, show them what could happen. He thought himself so important that he could do this, that he could work his way into God's grace, that he could control his own life. But Lazarus, one who was laying down, who was poor and hungry, he couldn't control anything. He knew that he couldn't control anything. He was as powerless as a baby, as a woman laying on a couch, or as a farmer in the second poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. God's grace is for those who know they need it, for those like Lazarus. And this is good news, because as even Jeff shows us, at some point we all come to know that we need God's grace. Whether it's because you're seeking forgiveness for something you had no control over, or whether it's you're lying on a couch and you're dying, or you're a poor farmer, we all might need it at some point. Amen.